Awesome. How is everybody doing? Now, before you answer, I need you to put some oomph in your answer. Ready? How's everybody doing? That's your oomph? How is everybody doing? Yeah. You know, life is not without challenges. Life is not without little things that happen to keep you on your toes. Everybody look down at your toes. When we started today, a number of things came that were some challenges for us. And it was so challenging that I realized that they were challenges. You know, sometimes things happen, we don't actually realize that it's a challenge. Now, there's two things we could do with a challenge. We could either embrace that challenge or we could run from the challenge. So today, I decided to embrace the challenge. What I would like to talk with you about today is something that is so close to my heart that I've based my whole entire life on it. Matter of fact, I created a philosophy around that. And it's about creativity. Everybody say creativity. Now, if I was to ask you guys, what is creativity? I would probably get a whole bunch of other answers. And creativity is one of those words that's similar to love. It's very difficult to kind of coin. It's very difficult to understand. But my definition of creativity is simply this. Creativity is your mixture, your blend of the elements that you've been given to formulate your reality. Does that sound too deep? Okay, let me say it again. In other words, creativity is your blend, your mashup of all of the things that you've been given to create you, to create your life, to create your identity. So sometimes when we hear the word creativity, we think of this phantasmagoric type of whimsical thing. But creativity is simply creating the now for you today. I call this philosophy the creative life. Part of the creative life is simply this. Life doesn't happen to you. You just happen to create the life that you want. The life that you've been dreaming of is the life that you are continually creating for yourself. Now, every dream has a movie. Every movie has a story. And every story has drama. I know some people's lives, man. You know, the only reason why I probably wouldn't do a reality TV show is because I would want to produce it, star in it, direct it, you know, be the executive producer. You know, that's the only reason why I wouldn't do one. Too many hats. Some of our lives are really movies. As a matter of fact, I want you to do this with me. I want you to put on your imagination hat. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes in a second. But before I do that, I want to give you this quote. It's a very interesting quote from a good friend of mine. His name was Einstein. Albert Einstein. Y'all know him, right? You know, okay, Albert Einstein. And he said, imagination, get this, is more important than education. And here was his reasoning. Imagination is continually in the future, while education lives in your past. Now, that's something to actually live by. So what I want you to do is to get a little bit creative with me. Look at the person on the side of you and say, let's get creative. All right, so we're about to imagine now. Close your eyes. I want you to imagine this with me. Imagine that you are in heaven. You've been summoned in heaven. And God is there. And you're walking through the pearly gates. Can you see it? Can you see it? You're about to go through the gates. And you realize to the right, there is a little group of people and they're talking and they're chattering, and you kind of pierce through to look to see who are the figures that's engaged in such deep conversation, and you look and for some reason you recognize that there was St. Peter and there was Moses and there was Abraham and there was someone in the middle of this little conversation. Can you see it with me? And he was actually teaching Moses and Abraham, and as you look and you pierce more, the guy that you're looking at looks a lot like Dr. Miles Monroe. So you continue on knowing that he would be there. Jesus comes and he holds your hand and you're walking. Then you get to the throne where God Almighty is. Now, there's a lot of light around. And you can't really make his face out. But as you get closer, God starts to resemble someone that looks very, very familiar. As a matter of fact, you're right up at the face of God, no more glowing light, and you recognize that, wait a minute, this is God. And he looks a lot like Morgan Freeman. So then he stands up on his throne and he says, I want you to produce a movie. And so you ask God, why? And he says, well, because in heaven we specialize in making movies. Then God explains. He says to you, you see, I want you to be the director of this script that I have. But I also want you to star in it. Now you're excited. God is going to create a movie and he's going to make you the director. So you're all excited. God says, oh, but there's one thing. Everybody say one thing. The one thing is you have no restraints on budget. You can make your movie as outlandish, as epic as you want. And then all of a sudden, you open your eyes, like some of you already have your eyes open, I can see you. And then boom, you're back in your space. Can I be honest with you? Can I be honest? That actually has already happened. God has already written a script about your life. He's in the movie making business. And all of his movies are blockbusters with a lot of action and drama. So he's asking you to be a director. You know, I saw a quote from one of my mentors, a guy that I know very well. His name is George Lucas, good friend of mine. And he said this, and he and Steven Spielberg have the same philosophy. He was in an interview and they said, so how do you like being in the entertainment industry? And he says, hold on a second. I'm not in the entertainment industry. What we do is not entertain. What we do is tell stories. We are masters at telling stories. I remember a quote. Napoleon Bonaparte says, history belongs to the winners of wars. The implications of that means this. If you lose the war, you have no story. If you lose the war, what he's saying is that you have no history if you lost. Someone else will tell it to you. I think this is what we're experiencing now in America, where a lot of the black culture has been expunged from education. So, back to your movie. What is your movie going to be about? Will it be a comedy? Will it be a drama? Will it be an action movie? You already have an assigned script. Now, what I want to talk to you specifically about, because I really, really love the title of this conference, Emerging. And more than that, the specific focus in which the speakers was asked to deliver. We are all storytellers. The difference between a good story and a bad story is the storyteller. The storyteller. If we become good at telling our own story, which most of us are fearful of doing. You know, the number one fear is not death. The number one fear of humanity, this is a poll done. The number one fear of humanity is public speaking. We are so afraid of messing up on this stage that we would rather die. I know some people like that. You were born to tell your story, so who better to tell it? You see, because after you leave, we want to know your story. And God, remember, He is in the business of making movies. So who's going to tell your blockbuster movie? Who's going to fund it? Who's going to make sure that every detail is known? You're responsible for that. You're responsible to tell your story. Another interesting thing that George Lucas said, he said, we don't just tell a story. I want you to hear me. He said, we actually tell stories that we believe in and that we want to portray an idea about. So in essence, he's saying the director is someone who has a philosophy and uses moving pictures, which we call motion picture, to actually tell a story to teach us something. So I got another question for you. What will humanity learn from the story of your life? What would they learn? What would we know? What would we see? If you are a storyteller, there's a couple of things that you would need. You would need a good script. We already figured that out. So everybody say good script. Good script. The next thing we're going to need is actors. But you know that you're starring in your movie. So you are the, you're also smart. You are the actor. The next thing is a budget. You need marketing. And then you also need a director to tell your story, which you are. So every story has 4 parts to it. There's 4 main parts to a story. And that is 1, the setup. Imagine with me. Behold in view a humbled vaudevillian veteran, cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer vanity, is a vestige of a vox populi, now vacant to vanish. However, this visitation is a bygone vextation, and now stands vivified, and has vowed to vanquish these venal and vigilant vermin, vicing, vanguarding Vikings, and vicious and ferocious, venomous villagers of vampires. It is a vendetta, held as a votive, not in vain, but as to one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. You could give me a hand right there. That was... Now, that was a setup for a movie, which happens to be one of my favorites. It's called V for Vendetta. This was the first time I ever realized that there were so many V words in the dictionary. He actually gave us everything in that movie with his opening scene. In theater, we call it, or movies, we call it the opening scene or the establishing shot. It tells you the secrets of what's going to happen before it actually does. Now, how many of you understood what I said? Come on, just read. I know you do. Say something. We got a lot of degrees in here. No one. I hadn't had a clue. But you know what I did? I realized it was an establishing shot. And there were some details in there that I needed to know if I was ever going to be a part of this movie experience. So I went home and I looked for the script and I saw it. I studied the meaning of every V word. My vocabulary is so expansive. Matter of fact, there's a word that I learned, a hippopotamonstrosescriptodiliophobia, which is the fear of big words. I didn't know I had that. You want me to say it again? You want me to say it again? Yeah. Hippopotamonstrosescriptodiliophobia. The meaning is in the word when you break it down. Your start has all the meaning of who you are when you break down your entrance, your establishing shot. My establishing shot. So I'm here to tell my story. But I wanted you to be inspired to know that you hold the responsibility to not just say your story, but to tell it. My mother was one of the greatest storytellers. She would tell us stories, and it actually passed through to me. She would tell us stories, but she didn't just tell us stories. She actually created the characters that was involved in the story. So I did the same thing with my kids. When I made up this character called Chirpy, my daughter was afraid, in the dark, as most of our children are, or were. And so I would go in the room and I would go under the covers with her and I'd say, don't worry about it because Chirpy's here. And she was like, why? And I would be, because Chirpy's your friend. And she would be, well, where is he? And so I put my hand up and say, here am I, I'm Chirpy. So don't just say your story. Tell it. Make it believable. This is your opportunity to convince. How many of you were convinced that I knew what I was talking about when I said those V words? Did it sound convincing? Did it look convincing? Some of you have the opportunity to tell your story, and I'm like, geez, let me go watch some. Because we have the responsibility to be good storytellers, because those are the stories that we will remember. So, why am I here? My setup is that my mother and my father, this is what usually happens when we come into the world, man meets girl, man meets woman, and they have a little baby, and then come out. I was born into a situation where my mother and my father was not married. I have, how many brothers? It's the official count is 14. And I think I have a Jamaican brother, which would be why I had an affinity for reggae music, I suppose. But it's about 15 or 14 of us. So, born into a situation that was not the norm in a lot of situations. But it's your establishing shot. The meaning is in the story. I grew up, family, second to the last. I'm number, 14? So that would mean I would be number what? 13. 13, second to the last. Now, my mother told me a very interesting story. And she said to me, we had a housekeeper. I was like, yeah, because you see, by the time as I came around, we had no money. I was like, a housekeeper, what did they do? She said, well, they kept the house. You mean like stuff like we have to do, clean up and stuff like that? Somebody actually did that? She's like, yeah, we had money. I say, whoa, well, where is it? He's like, oh, ask your dad. He spent it. The story has details. So, I went and I had a little talk with my dad. And I just asked him, of course, kids are really, brazen. We just speak what we say, what we see. And I said, Dad, where's the money? And he didn't have an answer for me. So that kind of stuck with me. From there, I went on to school, and my mother told me the story that before I was born, she had a fall. She was about, I think she said about 6 months. She had a fall down the stairs, and they didn't think that she would make it. She went there and to the hospital, and everything was okay. And so 9 months, a few months later, I came out and I was 11 pounds. I was 11 pounds. That's a big baby, y'all. That's a huge baby. All the women who had kids, y'all know what I'm talking about. So I was 11 pounds. And my mother said that the housekeeper told her something. And this is what she told us. She said, you know, she's Jamaican. She said, you got a creative giant inside of you, and he's waiting to be born. So my mother told me this when I was in high school. And it sounded so familiar because in 3rd grade, I was doodling on my little piece of paper, and my teacher, Miss Turner, came and she saw that I wasn't paying attention in school. And so she snatched a piece of paper away from me, and she said, what are you doing? And she looked at it and she saw my drawing. I was actually drawing Mickey Mouse and Pluto. And she said, did you trace this? And I said, no, I actually drew that. And she said, you did? And then my teacher said something. She said, you know, there's a creative giant inside of you. What are you going to do with it? It moved her so much that next year they had a school trip. Guess where that was? Disney World. The school had never done this before. My teacher decided that you needed to go. Why? Because you have a creative giant inside of you waiting to come out. So they devised a scholarship. Why? So that me, out of 2,000 kids, could go to Disney World. Now, my mother was a chaperone, so they didn't want it to look like favoritism, so they told me I better not tell anyone of the kids that I was going because they knew that I didn't have any money to pay for it. So when I went home, I said, Mom, I'm going to Disney World. She said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. My teacher told me I was. And so she said, well, let me find out. She went, she talked to the teachers. The teacher said, yes, we are creating a scholarship for him. The details are in the story. I go to Disney World, I come back. I said, Mom, I saw all the characters I watch on television. It was awesome. She said, great, write me a story about it. So I said, well, good, but the only problem is, and she said, what? I said, there were no characters that spoke like me, a Bahamian. Guess what my mother told me? She said, then create them. The story has the details. My teacher planted a seed in me that grew. My mother watered that seed by expanding my imagination. I didn't just rely on the things that I learned. You know, I grew up with people always saying to me, you know, there's a creative giant inside of you waiting to come out. Today, I'm standing here and I'm saying to you, sometimes I don't always feel that way. Sometimes I truly feel like there's a creative midget inside of me and I want him to come out. That's when life goes bad. We call this the drama. When I graduated from school, my teacher said to me, she said, you're going to do great things. She made sure that with all the awards that was given, that there was a music award. There had never been a music award in the school, not like this one. And she said, because you wrote this song and because you did this and you had a band and blah, 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 she said, we're creating this and because I think I need to give you this. That was Miss Schubert. Miss Schubert, Miss Turner. Wonderful teachers. At that night when I graduated and I held all of the awards in my hand and I realized something, the words of my father started to regurgitate when I asked him when I was smaller about what he'd do with money. And I realized at that point that even though everyone was saying you are the most creative person or there's a creative giant inside of you, I really didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to be successful. Matter of fact, I thought success was a product that rich people bought. I didn't think that I could afford success. Like, it's too expensive, like a car. You know, I can't afford a Range Rover. I can't afford a Mercedes. So, one day I'll be able to buy success. And so I remember having this overwhelming fear of what in the world am I going to, how am I going to meet the expectations of all this potential? This is when I met, matter of fact, before I say that, I want to say this. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. A year later, after my graduation, I met a man called Dr. Miles Monroe. And the first thing he said to me was, guess what? There's a creative giant inside of you. And I'm going to help you get him out. That's what my mentor said. From that moment on, the seed that my mother planted became an actually animation. I saw that there were no Bahamian characters at Disney World. I saw that there were no Jamaican characters. There were no Trinidadian characters there. So I just created my own. That seed created a story. The story became my reality. My question to you is, are you continuing to direct the stories in your life? What are we going to know about you? What are we going to learn about you? Let's do this. Imagine with me. You want to play the imagine game again? Okay. Imagine with me. This time, can you close your eyes for me, please? Don't worry, your phone isn't going anywhere. It's going to be there. Brian Tracy says this. How big would we dream if we knew we could not fail? If you knew that whatever you did, it was going to prosper, what would you do? Well, I want you to think about that dream, and I want you to create the answer and create your story. My name is Delano Johnson. Embrace your creativity. Thank you.